You've seen the face, on posters, on murals, on countless t-shirts. It's one of the most reproduced images in history, a symbol of rebellion, revolution, and defiance. But who was the man behind the icon? I'm going to tell you the life story of Ernesto Guevara, the man who became Che. We'll explore what he did, why he mattered, and why, more than half a century after his death, his legacy continues to spark fierce arguments. Behind the image was a doctor-turned-guerrilla who helped topple a government, a statesman who confronted the United States at the United Nations, and a revolutionary who died trying to ignite a continental uprising in a remote Bolivian village. His story is not simple. It's a story of conviction and contradiction, of idealism and brutality. To understand it, we have to go back to the beginning. Ernesto Guevara de la Serna was born on June 14, 1928, in Rosario, Argentina, into an upper-middle-class family with aristocratic roots but bohemian left-leaning sympathies. He was the eldest of 5 children. From the age of 2, he was plagued by severe asthma, a condition that would shadow him for his entire life. The frequent debilitating attacks often confined him indoors, but they also forged a formidable willpower. Unable to always participate in strenuous activities, he turned his energy inward. He became a voracious reader, devouring books in his father's extensive library. He read everything: philosophy from Aristotle to Bertrand Russell, psychology from Freud and Jung, poetry by Neruda and Keats, and political theory from Marx, Engels, and Lenin. This intellectual curiosity laid the groundwork for his later political awakening. In 1948, he enrolled in the University of Buenos Aires to study medicine. But his education wasn't confined to the lecture hall. In 1952, at age 23, he took a break from his studies. He and his friend Alberto Granado hopped on a leaky, sputtering 1939 Norton motorcycle they nicknamed La Poderosa, the Mighty One, to embark on a 9-month, 8,000-kilometer journey across South America. That trip changed him forever. He witnessed firsthand the continent's deep-seated poverty and social injustice. He worked alongside exploited copper miners in Chile, met destitute indigenous communities in the Andes, and volunteered for several weeks at a leper colony in Peru. There, he famously refused to wear rubber gloves, choosing to shake hands and eat with the patients to break down the wall of fear, separating them from the staff. In his journal, which would later become The Motorcycle Diaries, he wrote of a growing sense of a shared Latin American identity, distinct from the narrow nationalism he'd grown up with. He left Buenos Aires as a curious medical student. He returned a man whose political consciousness had been ignited. He finished his medical degree, but his path was now set on a different course. His journey next took him to Guatemala in 1954. He was drawn there by the democratically elected government of President Jacobo Arbenz, which was attempting progressive social reforms, including a significant land redistribution program that threatened the interests of the powerful American-owned United Fruit Company. Guevara watched as the CIA, fearing the spread of communism, orchestrated a coup that violently overthrew Arbenz's government. The experience was a brutal, formative lesson. For Che, it was definitive proof that any attempt at peaceful, democratic reform would be crushed by U.S. imperialism. He concluded that social justice could not be achieved without armed struggle to defend it. Fleeing Guatemala, he moved to Mexico City. It was there, in the summer of 1955, that he was introduced to a young Cuban lawyer in exile, Fidel Castro. Castro and his brother, Raúl, were planning an insurgency to overthrow Cuba's U.S.-backed dictator, Fulgencio Batista. After an all-night conversation, Guevara, the doctor, was convinced. He signed on as the group's medic. In November 1956, 82 rebels crowded onto a leaky yacht, the Granma, and sailed for Cuba. The landing was a disaster. They were ambushed by Batista's army almost immediately. Of the 82 who set out, only around 20, including Che, Fidel, and Raúl, managed to escape into the rugged Sierra Maestra Mountains. From this near-total failure, they built a revolution. In the mountains, Che's role evolved from doctor to warrior. He proved to be a natural guerrilla fighter and a brilliant tactician. Fidel promoted him to comandante, the first to earn the title. He became known for his strict discipline, his austerity, and his ruthlessness. He demanded the same sacrifice from his men that he demanded of himself, and he did not hesitate to order the execution of informers, deserters, or enemy spies. His methods were effective, but they remain one of the most controversial aspects of his life. Over 2 years, the small band of rebels gained the support of the rural peasantry and grew into an army. In late 1958, Che led a key column in the final offensive, winning the pivotal Battle of Santa Clara. The victory broke the back of Batista's army. On January 1, 1959, the dictator fled Cuba. The revolution had won. In the new revolutionary government in Havana, Che swapped his fatigues for suits, at least sometimes. He was placed in charge of La Cabaña fortress, where he oversaw the revolutionary tribunals for officials of the old regime, policemen, politicians, and soldiers accused of torture and war crimes. Hundreds were executed. Critics condemn these trials as summary justice, lacking due process. Supporters defend them as necessary accountability for years of state-sponsored brutality. He was then appointed head of the National Bank, where he famously signed banknotes simply Che, and later, Minister of Industry. He was the architect of Cuba's economic policy, pushing for rapid industrialization and the diversification of the economy away from sugar. He championed moral incentives over material rewards, believing that a new man could be forged, a selfless citizen motivated by duty and social consciousness, not personal gain. As Cuba nationalized industries and agricultural land, its relationship with the United States disintegrated. The U.S. imposed a crippling economic embargo, a set of sanctions designed to isolate the island. In response, Cuba turned to the Soviet Union for economic and military support, firmly placing itself in the Cold War's Eastern Bloc. The tensions escalated dramatically. In April 1961, the CIA-backed Bay of Pigs invasion by Cuban exiles failed, strengthening the revolution's resolve. Then, in October 1962, the world held its breath during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the discovery of Soviet nuclear missiles on the island brought the superpowers to the brink of nuclear war. Che was reportedly furious when the Soviets withdrew the missiles without consulting Castro, hardening his stance against any compromise with imperialist powers. Che increasingly saw himself not just as a Cuban leader, but as an internationalist revolutionary. He became a prominent voice on the world stage, traveling widely as Cuba's ambassador. He fiercely criticized U.S. capitalism and imperialism, but he also grew disillusioned with the Soviet Union, which he accused of revisionism, abandoning true revolutionary principles for peaceful coexistence with the West. He argued that the only way to defeat imperialism was to overstretch its resources by creating many Vietnams. This was a call for simultaneous armed uprisings across the developing world. In a famous 1964 speech at the United Nations, he denounced colonialism, condemned racial segregation in the United States, and openly acknowledged Cuba's support for armed struggles in Latin America. By 1965, Che had grown restless. Frustrated with the bureaucracy of governing and the compromises of geopolitics, he was a fighter without a war. He believed his true calling was on the front lines. He vanished from public life, slipping out of Cuba to put his many Vietnams theory into practice. His first stop, the Congo. The campaign was a disaster from the start. Leading a contingent of Cuban volunteers to support a Marxist rebellion, Che found himself mired in failure. The mission was plagued by poor logistics, incompetent and uncommitted local rebel leaders, constant infighting, and the ravages of disease and unfamiliar terrain. After 7 months of frustration, he withdrew his forces, calling the experience a history of a failure. Undeterred, he planned his next and final revolutionary effort. In late 1966, disguised and traveling under a false identity, he arrived in Bolivia. His goal was to establish a guerrilla FOCO, a small mobile armed group that would act as a spark to ignite a continental revolt against US-backed military dictatorships. But the spark never caught fire. The Bolivian Communist Party offered little support, and the local peasantry, whom Che expected to rally to his cause, remained suspicious and fearful. His small band of about 50 fighters was isolated, battling harsh conditions, starvation, and Che's own recurring asthma attacks. Meanwhile, the Bolivian army, trained and assisted by U.S. Army Special Forces and the CIA, relentlessly closed in. On October 8, 1967, his group was encircled and overwhelmed in the Euro ravine. Che, wounded in the leg and his rifle destroyed, was captured. He was taken to a nearby village, La Higuera, and held overnight in a crumbling adobe schoolhouse. The order came from the Bolivian president: terminate him. The next day, October 9th, he was executed by a Bolivian soldier. Ernesto Che Guevara was 39 years old. In death, Che became more powerful than he had been in his final years of life. The photograph taken by Alberto Corda in 1960, Guerrillero Heroico, was transformed into a global symbol. For millions, it stands for resistance against oppression, anti-imperialism, social justice, and the ultimate sacrifice for one's beliefs. But for others, particularly Cuban exiles and victims of political violence, the image evokes something far darker: authoritarianism, the suppression of dissent, curtailed freedoms, and the brutal human cost of armed revolution. They point to his role in the executions at La Cabana and his unyielding belief that violence was a necessary tool for change. Both readings point to a life lived at the extremes. He was a healer who became a killer, an intellectual who chose action, an idealist who employed ruthless methods. Che Guevara didn't just leave a photograph. He left a fierce and enduring debate about the morality of political violence, the price of justice, and what it truly means to fight and die for an ideal. Understanding him requires grappling with all of it: the doctor, the commander, the statesman, the icon, and the man. If this helped untangle the myth from the man, let us know in the comments. What part of his complex story do you think most defines his legacy?